On the night of June 2nd, 1941, in a small house in the Bronx, Lou Gehrig stopped breathing. His wife Eleanor was beside him. His parents were in the room. He slipped away quietly. No struggle, no cry. The Iron Horse, the man who had played 2,130 consecutive games, the man who had never missed a day of work in 14 years, simply stopped. He was 37 years old. He could not walk. He could not feed himself. He could barely speak. But his mind was perfect. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, the disease that bears his name to this day, destroys the body while leaving the brain untouched. You are trapped inside yourself. You watch yourself disappear, and there is nothing you can do about it. He died exactly 16 years to the day after he had replaced Wally Pipp at first base for the New York Yankees. June 2nd, 1925, June 2nd, 1941. The day the streak began and the day everything ended. The same date, 16 years apart. This is the story of Lou Gehrig's final 48 hours. But to understand those hours, you have to understand the life that led to them. The life of a man who never missed a game, who played through broken bones he never told anyone about, who stood at home plate at Yankee Stadium and called himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth while his body was already dying, and the wife who held his hand until the very end. Henry Louis Gehrig was born on June 19, 1903, in the Yorkville neighborhood of Manhattan. His parents were German immigrants. His father Heinrich was a metal worker who struggled with alcoholism and could not hold a steady job. His mother Christina cleaned houses, took in laundry, and cooked for Columbia University fraternities to keep the family fed. Of their 4 children, only Lou survived past infancy. 2 siblings died of measles and whooping cough. A sister died at birth. Christina poured every ounce of her fierce, protective love into her only surviving child. She called him the one thing she had. Lou was big from the start, broad-shouldered, thick-legged, strong in the way that children of manual laborers are often strong. He attended Commerce High School in Manhattan, where he played football and baseball. In 1920, as a 17-year-old, he hit a grand slam at Wrigley Field during an intercity high school championship game in Chicago. The ball traveled so far that reporters from the Chicago Tribune wrote about it the next day. A high school kid from New York had just hit a ball out of a major league park. He attended Columbia University on an athletic scholarship, playing both football and baseball. The New York Yankees signed him in 1923. He was 20 years old. For the first 2 years, Gehrig was a part-time player, a pinch hitter and occasional starter who batted behind the great Wally Pipp at first base. Then, on June 2nd, 1925, Pipp asked out of the lineup with a headache. Gehrig took his place. He would not leave the lineup for 14 years. The consecutive game streak reached 2,130 games. It spanned from June 2nd, 1925 through May 2nd, 1939, 14 years without missing a single game. During that stretch, Gehrig played through broken bones in his hands, back spasms that made it painful to bend over, fevers that left him drenched in sweat, and injuries that would have sidelined anyone else for weeks or months. X-rays taken late in his career revealed 17 fractures in his fingers and hands that had healed on their own because Gehrig had never reported them to the team trainers. He simply taped his hands, gripped the bat as tightly as he could, and played. The record stood for 56 years until Cal Ripken Jr. broke it in 1995, playing 2,632 consecutive games. He hit .340 for his career. He hit 493 home runs. He drove in 1,995 runs, including 184 in 1931, still the American League record nearly a century later. He won 2 MVP awards and a Triple Crown in 1934. He played in 7 World Series and won 6 championships. He hit 4 home runs in a single game against the Philadelphia Athletics on June 3, 1932. Becoming only the 3rd player in modern history to accomplish the feat. His numbers across his peak years were staggering. From 1927 through 1937, an 11-year stretch, Gehrig averaged a .351 batting average, 37 home runs, and 157 runs batted in per season. He hit over 300 for 13 consecutive seasons. He drove in 100 or more runs for 13 consecutive seasons. He scored 100 or more runs for 12. The consistency was inhuman. It was as if someone had programmed a machine to produce Hall of Fame numbers every single year, without variation. He did all of it in the shadow of Ruth, batting fourth behind the most famous athlete in the world. Ruth took every headline. Ruth was on every front page. Ruth was the one the fans came to see, the one the sports writers quoted, the one the photographers followed. Gehrig walked to the plate after Ruth and quietly produced numbers that rivaled his teammates without receiving a fraction of the recognition. A sports writer once said that interviewing Gehrig after Ruth was like getting excited about cottage cheese after a 5-course banquet. Gehrig never complained, he never sought attention, he never gave inflammatory quotes to reporters or staged public arguments to generate coverage. He showed up every day, played every game, hit the ball as hard as he could, and went home. He was the most productive, invisible man in the history of American sports. He married Eleanor Twitchell on September 29, 1933. She was a spirited, sophisticated woman from a well-to-do Chicago family who had met Gehrig during a game at Comiskey Park. Their courtship was long-distance and old-fashioned. When they married, Christina Gehrig was furious. She believed no woman was good enough for her Lou. The tension between Eleanor and Christina would last for years. But Eleanor was exactly what Lou needed. She brought him out of his shell. She made him laugh. She gave him a life beyond baseball. They were deeply, completely in love, in the quiet, uncomplicated way that people who do not need anyone else's approval are in love. The first signs of trouble appeared in the 1938 season. Gehrig's batting average dropped to .295, his lowest since his first full year in 1925. His home run total fell to 29, respectable for most players, but alarming for a man who had averaged 37 per year for the previous decade. His movements around first base were slower. He stumbled on routine plays. Teammates noticed that his grip on the bat was weaker, that his swing had lost its violence, that he seemed to be fighting his own body on every play. Everyone assumed it was age. Gehrig was 35. He had played in every game for 13 consecutive years. His body had absorbed thousands of collisions, slides, foul tips, and hit by pitches without missing a single day. Of course, he was breaking down. He would rest over the winter, come back strong in the spring, and be Lou Gehrig again. He was not Lou Gehrig again. During spring training in 1939 at St. Petersburg, Florida, the decline accelerated dramatically. Gehrig moved as if his feet were encased in concrete. His bat speed, once explosive, was gone. Joe DiMaggio watched Gehrig miss 19 consecutive fastballs during batting practice and knew something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. This was not a slump. This was not aging. This was something else entirely. Something no one in that clubhouse had ever seen. The regular season confirmed it. In 8 games, Gehrig batted .143 with 4 hits in 28 at-bats and just 1 run batted in. He could not field his position. Balls that he had scooped effortlessly for 15 years now rolled past his glove or bounced off his chest. He could not bend down quickly enough. He could not move laterally. In one game, a teammate congratulated him for making a routine play at first base, the kind of play Gehrig had made 10,000 times without thinking. The teammate's encouragement was meant kindly. It devastated Gehrig. When your teammates congratulate you for doing something ordinary, you know something is very wrong. At Yankee Stadium, fans who had cheered for him since the 20s began to boo. The sound of those boos, directed at a man who had given the franchise everything he had for 16 years, was one of the cruelest sounds in baseball history. On May 2, 1939, at the Book Cadillac Hotel in Detroit, before a game against the Tigers, Gehrig walked into manager Joe McCarthy's room early in the morning. He had been awake most of the night, turning the decision over in his mind. He knew what he had to do. He had known for weeks. He just could not bring himself to say the words until now. "I have not been a bit of good to the team since the season started," he said. "It would not be fair to the other boys for me to stay in there." McCarthy fought back tears. He did not argue. He did not try to talk Gehrig out of it. He knew, just as Gehrig knew, that the time had come. "I told him it would be as he wished," McCarthy told reporters later that day. "Like everybody else, I am sorry to see it happen. I told him not to worry. Maybe the warm weather will bring him around." That afternoon, when the public address announcer told the crowd at Briggs Stadium that Gehrig had pulled himself from the lineup, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the Detroit fans, the opposing fans, gave Lou Gehrig a standing ovation. He tipped his cap, walked back to the dugout, and sat down on the bench. His eyes were filled with tears. The streak was over at 2,130 consecutive games. Babe Dahlgren took his place at first base. The Yankees won 22-2. In a haunting detail, Wally Pipp, the man Gehrig had replaced 14 years earlier, was in the stands that day. In June, Gehrig traveled to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. On June 19th, his 36th birthday, the doctors delivered the diagnosis: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a progressive degenerative disease that destroys the motor neurons responsible for voluntary muscle movement. There was no treatment, there was no cure. The prognosis was 2 to 3 years. Eleanor received the phone call from the doctors before Lou did. "It hit me amidships," she later said. The doctors told her the truth. Her husband was going to die, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. ALS is a uniquely cruel disease. It attacks the motor neurons, the nerve cells that run from the brain through the spinal cord and out to the muscles, destroying them one by one. Your muscles weaken, your limbs stop responding. Your hands lose their grip, your legs lose their strength, your voice fades to a whisper. Eventually, the muscles that control breathing fail, but your brain continues to function perfectly throughout. You are trapped inside a body that is shutting down around you, fully conscious of every stage of the decline, unable to stop it, unable to slow it, unable to do anything except watch yourself disappear. For a man like Lou Gehrig, a man who had built his entire identity on physical strength, endurance, and the ability to show up every single day no matter what, ALS was the cruelest possible fate. The disease took away the one thing that defined him, his reliability. The Iron Horse could no longer be relied upon to stand. On July 4, 1939, the Yankees held Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day at Yankee Stadium. 61,808 fans filled the ballpark on a steamy summer afternoon. The 1927 Murderers Row team came back for the occasion, including Babe Ruth, who had not spoken to Gehrig in years. Their friendship had been destroyed by a personal dispute involving their families that neither man ever fully explained. But on this day, none of that mattered. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia called Gehrig the greatest prototype of good sportsmanship. McCarthy tried to speak about what Gehrig meant to him and could barely get the words out. His voice cracked. He stepped away from the microphone. Then Gehrig stepped to the microphone. He had not prepared a speech. He spoke from his heart for approximately 2 minutes. "For the past 2 weeks, you have been reading about the bad break I got. Yet today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." He thanked his teammates. He thanked the opposing players who had sent him kind words. He thanked his wife Eleanor, calling her a tower of strength who had shown more courage than he dreamed existed. He thanked his mother and father. The crowd wept. Ruth walked across the diamond and embraced him. It was the first time they had touched in years. The Yankees retired his number 4 that day. It was the first number retired in the history of professional sports. Every retired number in every stadium in every sport in the world traces back to that afternoon at Yankee Stadium. Gehrig traveled with the Yankees as non-playing captain for the rest of the 1939 season, sitting in the dugout and cheering for his teammates. The Yankees won their 4th consecutive World Series. Gehrig watched from the bench, his body visibly thinner, his hands too weak to hold the gifts that had been presented to him on Appreciation Day. In December of 1939, the Baseball Hall of Fame held a special election and inducted Gehrig immediately, waiving the standard 5-year waiting period. He was the youngest player ever enshrined at 36. After the season, Mayor LaGuardia offered Gehrig a position on the New York City Parole Commission. The appointment was not charity. LaGuardia genuinely believed that Gehrig's character, his discipline, his understanding of what it meant to work hard and overcome obstacles made him the right person to evaluate young offenders and decide whether they deserved a second chance. Gehrig agreed immediately. He needed purpose. He needed something to do besides sit in his house and wait for his body to fail him. The job required him to live within city limits, so Lou and Eleanor moved from their apartment in Larchmont, a comfortable Westchester suburb, to a two-story house at 5204 Delafield Avenue in Riverdale, a quiet neighborhood in the northwest Bronx where tree-lined streets ran down toward the Hudson River. The house was modest by the standards of a man who had earned over $400,000 in his baseball career. But it was home. It would be the last home Lou Gehrig ever knew. Gehrig took the parole job with the same seriousness he had brought to baseball. He reviewed cases involving juvenile offenders, many of them boys from the same kind of working-class immigrant neighborhoods where he had grown up in Yorkville. He understood poverty. He understood the temptation to cut corners. He understood what it felt like to have nothing and to want desperately to have something. He visited detention facilities and talked to young men who reminded him of himself at their age, minus the baseball talent. He went to his City Hall office regularly, dressed in a suit and tie, walking through the marble corridors with a gait that became more unsteady with each passing month. Eleanor became his secretary, his driver, his constant companion, and eventually his hands. As the disease progressed and his grip weakened to the point where he could not hold a pen, Eleanor would place the pen between his fingers and guide his hand across the signature line. She held the pen. He provided the intent. Together, they signed the documents that determined whether young offenders would go free or remain behind bars. He continued going to the office until approximately early May of 1941, about a month before his death, when his deteriorating condition finally made it impossible for him to walk through the corridors or sit upright at his desk. He quietly resigned from the position. No press conference, no farewell statement, no public announcement. That was not Lou Gehrig's way. He had never sought attention when he was healthy. He was certainly not going to seek it now that he was dying. Throughout the final 2 years, the Gehrig household maintained a normalcy that required enormous effort. They hired a butler and a maid, but neither was allowed near Lou's room. Eleanor's mother, Nellie Twitchell, moved in and delivered meals when Lou became confined to bed. There was a constant rotation of visitors: comedian Pitsy Katz, actress Tallulah Bankhead, sports writer and neighbor John Kieran, and old Yankees teammates who came to sit with their former captain and talk about baseball, about the old days, about anything except what was happening to his body. Eleanor described his decline as being like a great clock winding down. The metaphor was precise. There was no sudden crash, no dramatic collapse, just a slow, steady diminishment. Each week, he could do a little less. Each month, another function disappeared. His walk became a shuffle, his shuffle became a stumble, his stumble became a wheelchair. His voice, once strong enough to carry across a baseball diamond, faded to a whisper. By late May of 1941, Gehrig was bedridden. He was 25 pounds below his playing weight. He could not walk, he could not feed himself, he could barely speak above a murmur. His hands, the same hands that had gripped a bat and driven in 1,995 runs, lay motionless on the blanket. But his mind was clear. That was the cruelty. His mind was perfectly, agonizingly clear. The final 48 hours of Lou Gehrig's life began on May 31st, 1941. The house on Delafield Avenue was quiet. It had been quiet for weeks. The carousel of visitors that had sustained the household for nearly 2 years had slowed to a trickle. The friends who had come to sit with Lou, to tell jokes and talk about baseball and pretend that everything was normal, came less often now. There was nothing left to pretend. Eleanor was at his side, as she had been for months, sleeping in a chair next to his bed, waking at every sound, checking his breathing, adjusting his pillows, talking to him in the quiet voice she used when she did not want him to hear the fear in it. She had not left the house in weeks. She had not slept more than a few hours at a time in months. She was 37 years old, and she was watching the love of her life disappear. Christina, his mother, the fierce German immigrant who had scrubbed floors and cooked for fraternities to keep her only surviving child fed, sat in the next room and waited. She had buried 3 children in infancy. Now she was watching her 4th child die at 37. His father, Heinrich, who had struggled with alcoholism for decades and had never been the provider Christina needed him to be. sat quietly and said nothing. Nellie Twitchell, Eleanor's mother, who had moved into the house months earlier to help with Lou's care, handled the cooking and the logistics of keeping a dying man comfortable. Outside, the world was moving toward war. German U-boats were sinking Allied ships in the Atlantic. President Roosevelt had declared an unlimited national emergency just days earlier on May 27th, warning the nation that the threat of Nazi aggression was closer than anyone wanted to believe. The Yankees were playing baseball at Yankee Stadium, as they always did. Joe DiMaggio, Gehrig's successor as the face of the franchise, was in the middle of what would become the most famous hitting streak in the history of the sport, 56 consecutive games. The papers were full of DiMaggio's streak and Roosevelt's speech and the war in Europe. Inside the house on Delafield Avenue, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound of Lou Gehrig breathing. On June 1st, Gehrig's condition worsened noticeably. His breathing became shallow and labored. The muscles in his chest, the last major muscle group still functioning, were weakening. Each breath required more effort than the last. Eleanor contacted the doctors. There was nothing they could do. There had never been anything they could do. The experimental vitamin E injections that Gehrig had received months earlier, based on animal studies that had shown promise in the 1920s, had produced no discernible effect. ALS did not respond to medicine in 1941. It barely responds to medicine in the 21st century. Eleanor stayed. She held his hand, though his hand could not squeeze back. She talked to him about the early days, about their courtship, about the time they first met at Comiskey Park in Chicago, about the road trips and the World Series parades, and the apartment in Larchmont where they had been happy before the disease invaded their lives. She told him she loved him. She told him she would be all right. She later wrote, "I would not have traded 2 minutes of the joy and grief with that man for 2 decades of anything with another." On the evening of June 2nd, 1941, the family gathered around the bed. Eleanor, Christina, Heinrich, Nellie Twitchell, the people who had loved him longest and most completely surrounded the man who was about to leave them. At 10:10 in the evening, Lou Gehrig died. Eleanor wrote that the most beatified expression spread across his face at the moment of death, as if the pain and the frustration and the indignity of 2 years of relentless decline had been lifted in an instant. The great clock had wound down. The Iron Horse had finally stopped. He was 37 years old, 17 days short of his 38th birthday. He had been married for 7 years and 8 months. The news reached the outside world within minutes. Radio stations interrupted their programming. Telephone lines at the Yankees' offices lit up. Reporters scrambled for quotes. The wire services transmitted the bulletin across the country. Lou Gehrig, the Iron Horse, was dead. Babe Ruth and his wife Claire drove to the Gehrig residence immediately, arriving in the middle of the night. Ruth had not been a regular visitor during Lou's illness. The relationship between the two men had been complicated for years, strained by a personal dispute involving their families that neither had ever fully explained to the press. They had reconciled publicly at the 1939 Appreciation Day ceremony, when Ruth walked across the diamond and embraced his dying former teammate. But the visits after that had been infrequent. Ruth came now, though. On the night that mattered, he came. He sat with Eleanor in the living room of the Delafield Avenue house, the two of them surrounded by the silence of a home where someone has just died. Ruth wept. The most boisterous, most confident, most self-assured athlete in American history sat in a chair and cried for the quiet man who had batted behind him for a decade. Ed Barrow, the Yankees' general manager, arrived with his wife. The Barrow-Gehrig relationship had been fraught. Eleanor would never forgive Barrow for his treatment of Lou after the diagnosis. Barrow had told her, in his characteristically blunt fashion, that it was time for Lou to find another line of work. The comment had been practical. It had also been heartless. Eleanor carried the wound for the rest of her life. By morning, the tributes had begun. Mayor LaGuardia ordered all flags in New York City lowered to half-staff. Major League Baseball followed suit, ordering flags at half-staff at every ballpark in the country. The New York Times ran the obituary on the front page, above the fold, alongside news of the war in Europe. The following day, June 3rd and into June 4th, Thousands of mourners filed past Gehrig's casket at the Church of the Divine Paternity on Central Park West in Manhattan. The line stretched around the block. Men in suits and boys in dungarees waited side by side to pay their respects to a man most of them had never met. But all of them felt they knew. Ruth was among those who viewed the body. He stood at the casket and wept openly, in front of the cameras and the reporters and the strangers, making no effort to hide his grief. It was one of the few times in Babe Ruth's life that he had nothing to say. The funeral was held at Christ Episcopal Church in Riverdale, directly across the street from the house where Gehrig had died. The service was private, attended by family and close friends only. There were no eulogies. Gehrig would not have wanted them. He had never wanted anyone to make a fuss over him when he was alive. Eleanor was not going to let them start now. On June 4th, his remains were cremated at Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla, New York, a quiet burial ground in Westchester County, about 20 miles north of the Bronx. His ashes were interred there, in a plot that Eleanor would eventually share with him when she died 43 years later. 1 month later, on July 6, 1941, the Yankees dedicated a monument to Gehrig in center field at Yankee Stadium. The inscription reads, "A man, a gentleman, and a great ball player whose amazing record of 2,130 consecutive games should stand for all time. This memorial is a tribute to his loyalty, his courage, his devotion to team play, and his example in setting an ideal for American youth." The monument joined the one placed there in 1932 for Miller Huggins, the manager who had given Gehrig his chance. Ruth's monument would be added in 1949. Eventually, all three would anchor Monument Park, the shrine in center field that became one of the most sacred spaces in American sports. Eleanor Gehrig never remarried. She lived quietly in an apartment on Manhattan's East Side for 43 years after Lou's death. She kept his memory alive without ever turning it into a spectacle. She did not write a tell-all. She did not sell her story to Hollywood, though Hollywood made a movie anyway. The Pride of the Yankees, starring Gary Cooper and Teresa Wright, released in 1942. She did not chase fame or seek sympathy. She occasionally visited Yankee Stadium for Old Timers' Day, sometimes accompanied by Claire Ruth. The two widows, whose husbands had been the most famous teammates in baseball history, would sit together in the stands and watch old men play a young man's game and remember what it had been like when their husbands were the ones on the field. During World War II, Eleanor auctioned Lou's memorabilia and raised $6 million for the war effort. President Roosevelt summoned her to the White House to thank her personally. She worked with the American Red Cross Motor Corps, driving ambulances and transporting supplies. She threw herself into service the way Lou had thrown himself into baseball, completely, without reservation, without asking for recognition. In 1976, at the age of 72, she published a memoir called My Luke and I. She called him Luke because that was her private name for him, the name nobody else used, the name that belonged only to their marriage. The book told the story of their 9 years together, with the same quiet dignity that had characterized their life. She wrote about the courtship, the championships, the diagnosis, the speech, and the final night on Delafield Avenue. She wrote with the clarity of a woman who had made peace with her grief decades earlier but had never let go of the love that caused it. She died on March 6, 1984, on her 80th birthday. She was buried beside Lou at Kensico Cemetery. She left a large portion of her estate to ALS Research at Columbia University, the school where Lou had played football and baseball before the Yankees found him. The donations helped fund clinical trials at the Eleanor and Lou Gehrig ALS Center, which continues to search for a cure that has eluded science for more than 80 years. Lou Gehrig played 2,130 consecutive games. He played through broken bones and fevers and fractures he never reported to anyone. He batted cleanup behind Babe Ruth for a decade and never once asked for the spotlight. He stood at home plate and called himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth while dying of a disease that had no name, no treatment, and no cure. The disease has a name now. They call it Lou Gehrig's disease. It is the only disease in America named after a baseball player. More than 80 years after his death, it remains incurable. Every patient diagnosed with ALS today faces the same prognosis Gehrig faced in 1939. Progressive muscular decline, loss of function, and death. The timeline varies. The outcome does not. The final 48 hours of Lou Gehrig's life were quiet. There was no crowd. There were no cameras. There was no microphone and no speech. There was just a man in a bed in a house in the Bronx, surrounded by his wife and his parents and the people who loved him, breathing in and breathing out until he could not breathe anymore. He died the same way he played baseball, without complaint, without drama, without asking anyone to feel sorry for him. The Iron Horse simply stopped, the way a machine stops when it has given everything it has and there is nothing left to give. Eleanor said she knew the precise moment he was gone. She said a beatified expression spread across his face. She said it looked like peace. 16 years to the day after he had replaced Wally Pipp at first base. 16 years to the day after the streak began. June 2nd, the day it started, the day it ended. The luckiest man on the face of the earth. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.